Sometimes I tell stories where I know I'm going to get 100,000 views, and other times I tell stories where I know I'm going to get 100 views. But those stories are equally important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way we have to approach this as professionals. And I want the athletes to understand that is like, stop thinking about yourself. Go above and beyond what it means to you and what you're going to get out of it. And what can you do for the sport, you know?
Welcome back to Social Kick. I'm Brian Lundquist. We got a full crew, Dr. John Mullen, Luke Paddington, and one of the most respected personalities in the swimming world, one of the most accomplished sprinters in history, my friend, my coach, and host of Inside with Brett Hawke. Brett, thanks for joining us.
Guys, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, man, obviously it's been fun to watch your run post coaching, post swimming, and all the things that you've gotten yourself involved in. You're kind of everywhere now. I don't know what the future holds for you. I'm curious to know your thoughts, but it's a real pleasure to see your success in the sport. And are you having fun doing it?
I am, man. I'm having a lot of fun being the master of my ship, right? Like being able to kind of navigate my narrative and my life's narrative. And I think that's really important. I think I was in a period of my life back when I was coaching where I felt very controlled, where I had to, say certain things. I had to wear certain clothes. I had to, do certain things. And it was restrictive. Like there's an element of who you are that gets taken away in that, like stripped away, and you become kind of part of a machine, right? And that's okay. That can be good for a period of time. But I felt like there was kind of an authenticity that was being taken away from me after a while, where I would wake up every morning and I didn't feel like jumping out of bed and putting on. It's not an act, but it's not my whole self. It's not just me being me. You know what I mean? So now I do that. Now I get out of bed and I say, Brett, what do you want to do today? How do you want to do it? And I'm not restricted. I did this talk at ASCA the other day, and I could just be myself. Like I wasn't trying to impress anybody. I wasn't trying to worry about whether I was going to get fired for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. So it's like, it's just, there's a freedom in it, right? And I think you guys understand what I'm talking about with that.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a better time in history that you have the opportunity to do that. I mean, I think there's a lot of things in society that have sort of led to, from a technology standpoint, from a social standpoint, that's like really encourage people to have their own voice. And I feel like you saw that opportunity. And this is really on brand for you from my perspective as having been a pupil of yours. Like you've made a career out of seeing opportunity and striking on that opportunity and really leaning into it and making the most out of it on several different fronts, whether that be an opportunity within your professional swimming career to capitalize on that, to coaching opportunities, to now like building your platform. And it seems to me from the outside looking in, like, this is something that you do really well, is identify where those opportunities are and then time it and get into it.
Yeah, I think so. And it keeps tying back to this idea of being the master of your ship, like controlling your destiny. There's been points in my life where I've looked back and I've felt like, you know what, I didn't have control of that situation, or I didn't have full understanding of that. And now I do. Now I have experience and knowledge, and now I can use that now. And like, look, one of the most pivotal moments in my life was the 96 Olympic trials, where I actually got within the qualifying standards, right, Brian? So I finished 6th in the 100 freestyle, which was the same as the US, right? Was within the standard. And I think we saw this last year with one of the athletes too, where
Ryan Hill.
Yeah, exactly. And so they didn't pick me on the relay. So then, the head coach, Don Talbot, came up to me and said, look, if you finish first or second, because you finished 6th in the 100, we'll take you to the Olympics. And I finished 3rd by 3/100ths of a second. And at that point in time, I was 20 years old. I had just, I'd been out of high school for 3 years. I dedicated my life, but the way that I was dedicating my life is I was just doing what someone was telling me to do. you know, like, hey, just trust me 100% and I'll get you to the Olympics, right? And what I learned at that point in time is like, you've got to also listen to yourself as well. Like, you can't just put 100% trust in somebody else to get you to where you want to be. You've got to have some control. And that was a huge lesson for me in 96, sitting there watching the Olympics and not being part of it, right? And thinking to myself, at that point in time, I was a zero Olympian, right? And I thought, I'm never going to be an Olympian for the rest of my life. I had to sit there while I'm watching the Olympics thinking, that will never be my life. I'm now going to have to go and get a regular job and be a regular person. And my dreams of being an Olympian are gone. Like, it's over. And from that moment, now I can honestly say, like, I'm a 5-time Olympian, right? From the moment where I thought I was never going to be one at all to now I look back and I'm a 5-time Olympian. I've coached, you know, I've made Olympic finals. I've coached Olympic gold medalists. So it's like, it's incredible when you take control of your life back, what you can turn it into, you know?
They call me the historian. And I think 96, 97 is when I first became a fan of Brett Hawke. I'll tell you why. So 96, 97, 50 freestyler. That was the height of my career as well. There was this American guys and a Russian kid swimming pretty good in the 50 back then. So I was always for the Commonwealth guys. I was always for Foster and, you know, and then I heard about this guy, Brett Hawke. That's a cool name. He wins NCAAs in what, 97 you won it?
97,
right?
yeah.
Right. So you win NCs, like, who is this kid who won NCs as a freshman? Let's pay attention to this Aussie. Then you take down Australia in the 80s and 90s were not known for sprinting. You had Duncan Armstrong, Lucky Lane 6. You got Perkins, my idol, you know, back then. You were known for that. But not hundreds and not 50s. These people listen to the show now. Can you imagine Australia was not really known for the hundreds and 50s back in the 80s and 90s? We're not. Like, right now, that's what you're known for almost. Then you came along and you started to change narrative of Australia sprinting, in my opinion. You and Klim had the Australian record, right? Back and forth for a while, right? And then you held it till 06. You made the 2000 games. You made the 2004 games. You finaled. You were second seed in 04. What you did to Australia sprinting brought it in, I think, to where we are now going forward. And I think that's a bold decision you made in 96, 97 to take control. So again, kudos.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And I appreciate you saying those things and knowing that about me, because it is something of a sense of pride for me in terms of your life's history, right? And I certainly took pride in changing the narrative of the way that Australians looked at sprinting. I do feel part of that, right? And even to the extent of, there was a period of my life where I relinquished the 100 and said, you know what, like, I'm going to leave it to the guys that are a bit better at this than me. I'm going to be the most dominant 50 freestyler in Australia, number one, and I'm going to try to be that person in the world. Now, when I would stand up on the blocks next to guys like Gary Hall Jr. and Alex Popov, I'm not an idiot, right? Like, I can see my limitations, you know? So, but you have to have this sense of self, like this inflated sense of ego type thing of like, yes, I can be the number one swimmer in the world, right? Like, if you don't have that, you don't stand a chance. So there's certainly meets that I walked into like, I'm going to win this thing, you know? And I didn't. Like, I didn't win the Olympics. I finished 6th was my best. The World Championships, I actually finished 4th at the World Championships 3 times, so I missed the podium. But I walked in thinking that I'm the fastest man in the world. I'm going to dominate this race. And that's the belief that I had. And I think what that ended up doing was translating into these young Australians. And now you have, you know, a whole slew of Australians in this 50 and 100 that have done incredible things. You know, for instance, Eamon Sullivan, I know I had a huge influence on him growing up and because I mentored him, right? And so there's a sense of pride when you see that change in a country, for sure.
But Brett, how did you choose to just do the 50 back then? People like us, we did 100 to 50, the 100 fly. We didn't just focus on one event, the 50 free. What made you do that, and what made you get good at that? Who did you train with? Talk us about 98, 99. Who are you training with? What was that mindset just to be a 50 freestyler? Because it really forecasted the next 20 years of your career, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I knew my skills, right? Brian's very similar, right? Like, when I coached Brian, we had a pretty clear understanding of Brian's skills, what he could do and what he couldn't do, right? And I think you get to that realization with your coach, and then as an athlete of like, all right, this is what I can exploit. I knew I had speed. I had top end speed. I couldn't get the breath and the breathing down the way I needed to get into my rhythm and find that 100 stroke and technique. It wasn't a comfortable feeling for me, and it's very similar to the way I coached Bruno Fratis. Bruno was never comfortable in the 100. Even though he could put one together, it just wasn't his forte. So what I did is I said to myself, like, look, I want to travel the world with the Australian team, and I want to do it year after year. And I don't want to have any possibility of that not happening. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be the most dominant 50 freestyler that I could possibly be. And good luck to anyone who's going to try and beat me, because you're going to have to work some magic to beat me. And that was my mentality in Australia, is like, yes, I've got Ian Thorpe, I've got Michael Klim, I've got Ashley Callis, I've got Chris Feidler. I mean, these guys could swim legitimate hundreds, and they were, by the way, they were on the 4x1 relay, all four of them that won gold in Sydney. So these were the guys I was training with and racing. And so what I said to myself is, I'm never going to be able to guarantee that I could beat all four of them. I might beat one here and there, but I'm not going to beat all four of them on one particular day. But what I can do is I'm faster than these guys. I know it. They can't touch me. From point A to point B, they can't touch me. So that was my mentality of like, that's my guarantee. That's my guaranteed ticket to get to any championship that I want to go is I'm going to put all my time and energy into being the fastest swimmer I could be.
Yeah, we hear nowadays a lot about mental training. And like you said, you kind of controlled your own ship at that moment. And it sounds like you made a pretty strong mental shift. Was that something that you worked with anyone on back then? Was that something that you honed in on your own? And how did you create that confidence other than just being able to beat those guys day in and day out, or know you had more speed than them in Australia?
Yeah, for sure. I didn't do it alone, for sure. I had actually a chiropractor who was a personal trainer. He was kind of like a jack of all trades. Like he was doing my strength training. He was doing my body adjustments. Like he was hurting me and then he was fixing me, but he was also working on my mentality. He was just one of these guys that was kind of good energy. Like every time he walked in the door, he was like ready to go. He was pumped up. He was like, okay, we're going to work here. And he was structured. He was planned. So I hooked up with this guy pretty early on. I left college to go professional in '99, and I ran into him. I found him somehow. So aside from having a really good swim coach and a really good team, I put myself back into a team where Chris Feidler was the number one swimmer in Australia. He hadn't been beaten in the 50 in 9 years. 9 years he hadn't been beaten. Wow. And I put myself in that position where I'm going home to train with him because I want to figure out, like, if I stand a chance at these trials in 2000, he's the guy I got to beat, so I might as well go train with him. I run into this chiropractor, and for the next kind of 10 months, he worked on me physically, mentally, and just instilled belief in me, of like, Brett, no one's going to touch you. Like when it's time to get on the block, you're going to be 100% ready. And my body was ready. It was strong. It was supple. It was well trained. I'd been trained with this guy, so I knew where I could get him. And at that point, I just had so much confidence. It was a no-brainer. Like, I'm making this Olympic team. No one's touching me.
Before you made that move to Australia, you did something that not many of your Aussies do. I'm a big fan of Australia. I love that country.
Yeah, me too.
You went and swam, but you left it to swim college NCAAs. Not many Aussies swim the NCAAs. What made you make that decision? How did you end up in a little town in Alabama?
No, exactly. Look, it was the same thing of like, hey, I've got to take control here. I don't have many options. I can stay here and just continue to do the same things, or I can go to America and I can learn and grow and compete. I felt like I was missing competition. I was getting all the training I needed. Like most of the guys back then were trained for the 200, right? There's this mentality in Australia, to swim fast, you got to train for the 200. And so everybody's going through the motions. The training wasn't necessarily the problem. I had no racing. And so I was like, look, if I'm going to go to America and get some racing in, it was just one of those serendipitous things where I fell into Auburn. I didn't look anywhere else. I kind of, fell into David Marsh's lap, and I got lucky. He got lucky. It was just kind of one of those magic moments. And I made the most of my time there. I said to myself, like, I'm here to compete. And so, like, I competed every day in practice. You can ask David this. Like, we were in each other's faces all the time. We created this lane 8 posse, right? Of like lane 8's at the sprinters lane. Like, people couldn't come into our lane. You get beaten up if you tried to get into lane 8, like physically beaten up. And it was just like, that was the mentality we had back then of like, we're the fastest guys. This is our lane. No one can touch us. And it was like this mentality of like, we're going to compete every day, So I just thrived in that environment, and it was like a perfect scenario for me.
Hey, you were talking to Cesar Cielo recently about, coaching him to Olympic gold, and asked him, hey, what does it take? You tell me. I'm saying, I've heard you say this to him, like, hey, tell me, because I stood in the Olympic final, and you, Cesar, are someone who made a history of getting your hand on the wall first. What is it that it takes to get your hand on the wall first? And I think it can be kind of bittersweet when you pursue elite athletics, because your expectations are almost never fulfilled. Like, it's rare that you win every single race at every level. And I found that, post-career, it's nice to appreciate those moments where you did achieve. And, everyone else, you might not, but everyone else would look at you and go, well, you're an individual NCAA champion. Like, on one of the biggest stages ever, you got your hand on the wall first, and you stood and, looked at Goliath, in this case, Neil Walker, and said, I'm going to outrace you. Tell that story about the 97 50 final. I want to hear your perspective on like what it was like going in, the expectations on everyone in the field, and you winning that race.
It was really interesting. I mean, you guys have been to men's NCAAs. There's a buzz on the deck, and especially when there's a superstar kind of walking around the deck like a Caleb Dressel. There's always a buzz, and there's certainly a buzz with Neil Walker. He's the All-American guy, and look, Neil had a fantastic career, probably way better than the career that I had if you look at it on paper, for sure. But just on that particular day, just that one day, I had the better of him, right? That was it. And it was probably just that one moment, 19 seconds. I had the better of him. And the way that I got the better of him that day is there was an enormous amount of pressure on him, because in the morning, I was actually the top qualifier. So I was on the last heat, lane 4. He was the second fastest qualifier. So he's right in front of me, and I'm standing behind him. And I see this kid go from a 19.6 qualifying time to a 19.0 right in front of me, like drops half a second. And I'm on a 19.6 too. That was my fastest time. And I'm thinking to myself, well, shit, how am I going to drop half a second here like that? I mean, that's really good. It was almost like, dude, well done. Like you are legit. You're as good as everybody's saying you are. And it was a prelim swim. So everyone was like, oh, well, wait till he swims faster at night. So it was almost like this expectation that he was going to be the first guy under 19 seconds, and everybody was just kind of, that was the sense on deck. There was like no question. And I remember coming back that night and thinking to myself, oh, well, he's won it, I'll be pretty happy if I get second. Cool. And I just remember looking over when they were doing the introductions, and I could see the pressure on him, right? I could, what it's like when you see body language. Like, his body language is just like, he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. And I literally had this thought in my head of like, oh my God, this guy's pissing himself, like he's pissing his pants. Like that's just the reality of like what I was thinking in my head. And I thought to myself, oh, I got this guy. He's not beating me. And I just remember standing on the blocks and just turning my brain off and being like, just go, And I, what it's like when you have those feelings, Brian, of like, you don't remember the race. Like, everything is just flowing, and you're just like moving, and you're looking, and like you touch the wall, and you're like, holy shit, like, what did I just do? Like, I had that feeling, and I remember like I headbutted the block, and my whole team like went crazy. It was like, it was just one of those moments where you were just indestructible. Like, you just knew it. And you don't have those moments very often in your career. I certainly didn't have that feeling in the Olympic final where I was like, oh, I got these guys, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was just one of those experiences where I just had the better of him at that point in time.
Well, how did you think about that experience in preparation for an Olympic final and the World Championship finals? Was there anything that you looked back on and said, these are things that I did well and was able to, in one way exploit a competitor and use that to your advantage? Was it that you looked for these opportunities and maybe didn't see it again later? Like what did you take from that you applied later?
Yeah. And why?
I think in terms of my coaching, I learned more how to be a better coach of an athlete in that position, right? And so what I would do is I would allow my athletes to be the best version of themselves in that moment, right? And so what I did, I think the mistake I made in a couple of World Championship finals, Olympic finals, I constantly made the same mistake, and it bothers me to this day. Of like, I get there and things are good, and I immediately think, if I win this, it can change my life. Like I had this thought of the end result, like immediately start thinking of the end result, even behind the blocks of like, oh wow, in 21 seconds from now, I'm going to be Olympic champion. Like you shouldn't be having those thoughts right then and there. Right. The thought should just be clear and nothing. I've talked to Anthony Irvin about this. How do you win gold medals at the Olympics 16 years apart? He's like, I just turned my brain off and let it go. And that's what I didn't do, and it's not like I'm thinking for minutes. It's like a fleeting thought. Right. But like you allow it to come in, and as soon as those thoughts come in, they corrupt your body. It's like a corruption. And you don't allow yourself to be the best version of yourself. And so what I try to do with my athletes is allow the freedom just to turn off, and don't put pressure in terms of you have to do this and this is going to happen and that's going to happen and this is going to change your life and you're going to get all this money. Like, no, we're going out there to swim as fast as we possibly can from here to here. That's it. Just simplifying it to where it's just do the deed,
You're talking about how you are applying mistakes of your career to your coaching, and all who've coached have done that. But what was your greatest race, and how do you apply those moments? What was your greatest race? Was it a summer league team when you beat the kid next door? Was it NCs? What was your greatest race, and the positivity and how you use that in your coaching or your life?
I think my greatest race was at that championship in '97, where we were in the 200 medley relay, and we were in third place. I dove in third place on the freestyle leg. So it was Stanford and Texas were ahead of us. I can't remember who was in what position. I just know Stanford and Texas dove in ahead of me, and I went 18.6 on the back end of the relay. It was like the fastest split in history. No one had ever gone 18.6 before. It was ridiculous, in just a little Speedo back in 97, right? Like people didn't swim that fast back then. And I went 18.6 and I swam past two guys who legitimately swam really well, like 19 flats, and back then you'd think, wow, what a great split. I smoked them, so like that was easily the best swim of my life, where I felt like I was motoring down the pool. Like I was grabbing buckets of water and those guys were not going to beat me. It was like, I knew I was behind too. Like you could see flash, when guys dive in the pool, you're not staring at them, but you can see them go. And I'm like, I'm catching them, like immediately thought I'm catching them. And when you have moments like that, man, you wish every race was like that, but just doesn't work out that way.
What did you harness from that moment that you applied to a situation in the next 20 years?
Simplify it. Just simplify it. All you got to do is swim fast. You don't have to try and swim fast. I didn't try to swim fast at that point. I didn't say to myself, pull harder, like kick harder, like think about your breakout. I just thought I'm catching them. And it was just go, right? Like you go into an automatic. Yeah. And that's what I always try to get my athletes to do, is like stop thinking and just allow yourself. Now, you had to train at a certain level in order to tap into that, right? And so we trained hard, and I put a lot of pressure on my athletes. Brian can attest to this. And there's moments where I'm like really putting pressure on them to train, so that when we get to those moments, you're like, oh yeah, I've done this. I've trained harder than this. I've had to catch guys in practice. I've had Brett yelling at me. I'm like, this is easy. Here we go. You know, so you want those feelings to just be automatic at that point.
I wanted to get your perspective on your approach to professionalism, because by the time that you started coaching me and in our group, which you kind of came into by happenstance, it wasn't your intention. You just showed up on deck and were this wealth of experience, having come fresh off your professional swimming career, and then suddenly experiment turned into a coaching career and a lot of success along the way, and influencing a lot of lives, including mine. But you brought this perspective that I personally hadn't seen before. And I'd been around people at Auburn who were Olympic medalists and they were part of the training group, but your situation was different in that you were at that level and had been at that level for a long time, but also had a family, you had commitments, and your approach to the things that you did on a daily basis was just different, and I remember you talking about having built this network of resources that would help you be better, whether that was buying your own cameras because their cameras didn't exist on your pool deck in your training environment, and you needed to get that feedback. Like, we took that as something that was just maybe for granted. It was resources that existed already, and yet here you were kind of on your own, and if you had to own your destiny. And so when you showed back up, there was this totally just different wealth of knowledge that said, like, this is what it takes if you want to sustain a certain level of success, achieve it and stay there and build a career out of it. Like, where did that come from? How did you build that from the moment you stepped away from Auburn and flipped the switch onto, okay, like, I'm into this, I'm in deep, I'm committing to this swimming career, and I'm going to be the best. Did it happen over time, or like how did you get there?
It's a good question. Like, I didn't intend to be a swim coach. That was not my intention, but it just so happened that at the age of 31 in 2006,
Incredible.
I was one of the fastest swimmers in the world at that point. I was not injured. I was at the top of my game. I could have gone to 2008, but mentally I was satisfied. Like, I had done what I wanted to do. But I had this wealth of knowledge and I had this enthusiasm to still like I could have kept training, right? But like, coming to practice and training you guys was almost like me coming. A lot of the times, I was very into what you guys were doing, whether it was in the gym, I'd be working out with you or stretching with you, or like, I still felt connected to the group in a lot of ways. So like, I think you guys appreciated the fact of like, oh, this guy's all in here. It was just a natural transition for me to do that. But then it was like, I have all this experience of like, hey, these, like, if you do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and take care of all that, like, we can all have success. Like, I've learned through this process, but there has to be a commitment to the task. And I think you realize too, is like, I didn't want to do any more than we had to do. Like, our training group did just enough to be good in what we wanted to be good in, right? Like, for me, it was like, if you want to swim 100, train for the 100. Don't train for the 200, like where I've come from. Don't do things that are unnecessary in order to be successful in what you want to be successful in. Now, if you want to train for if you want to swim the 200, then yes, we have to train for it for sure. But the majority of our group were doing that. And so for me, it was like, there was just an excitement of feeling like I was still part of this group of young guys who were all trying to do what I had just done. You know what I mean? So I think there was that aspect of it, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like training for minimal effective dose or specificity was something that you were trying to preach back then, probably before those were common things with, USRPT and all that coming later. Do you feel like that came with open arms with the coaching community, or that your perspectives that you brought at that point were kind of cutting edge and different?
I wasn't trying to do less. That's okay. The myth. I wasn't trying to do less by intentional sake. I was trying to do what was necessary.
Sure.
Right? Like, in order to swim fast, you've got to train fast. And so like, we're going to train fast in order to have a great underwater and kick out, we're going to have to train our underwaters and kick out. In order to finish races, we're going to have some speed endurance, right? Like I looked at the race as like, what do we need to be successful in? It wasn't like, how can we do less? It was like, how can we do what's appropriate, right? And that was my mentality. A lot of what I did with Brian, like he'll tell you, we were in the pool for 2 hours, just like everybody else. Now, we weren't just churning up and down the whole time, but we're working and we're going from here to here to here. We're doing all sorts of different things, changing up the variables and having fun with it, because fun's part of the process, right? Like you got to enjoy it. A miserable swimmer is not a successful swimmer. You know, a happy, fast swimmer who is working just as hard as the guy next to him, but high-fiving at the same time. Like, to me, that's the type of environment that I want to be in. And so, like, I tried to create an environment where I was like, hey, Brett, what would you want to be in right now? How would you want to get the most out of yourself? Like, you're still an athlete who can identify with these guys. What would you want right now? And so I tried to create an environment where I would want to come to practice and be part of that. And and so that didn't mean doing less by any means, right?
Brian, give us a story about Brett. Did Brett ever try to jump in practice and race you guys, or stack up the weights and bench against you guys? In professional soccer, you get player managers who play and manage as well. Or is that crossing a line? And in coaching, you really have to draw the line?
No, well, that was what was so fun about Brett as a coach, because, well, first, he had very recently finished the athletic career as a swimmer. So, like, and I don't know, Brett, you really thought about yourself as being retired at that point, you know? And one of the things that, like, Brett used to shave down. You used to shave down for our meets. Like, you were just on coaching, but I remember you showing up to NCAAs the first year, and you're just like, I just had to get a fresh shave. I'm fired up. You know? It's like, you know,
I did.
I remember when you were just talking to Caesar about this too, where he's like saying, you know, the unique perspective of being able to have a coach who had Olympic final experience in the very last Olympic final before the next one, you know, like, I don't think that's ever happened in history, where you have, you know, someone who's in the final and then 4 years later they coach the gold medalist. That it was almost like we were just boys. You know, we were just bros, and we had a couple females in the group, but for the most part, a bunch of guys, and we were all just hanging out. And you were part of the group. You were the alpha and the leader of the group, a leader of the pack. But it was almost like, you know, we were peers in a way, and you were the captain of the team rather than, you know, you were this coach that had a big age gap between us. And you know, and obviously, like, in the gym, you know, doing workouts with us. And I think the thing that stood out to me was the creativity. And again, like, I don't know where this comes from, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts on it are, because I had never met a coach, and believe me, like, you and I were both coached by David Marsh, who was ultra creative. You took creativity, in my mind, to the next level with just being able to change things up. Yes, we were focusing on different areas of the race, be it, you know, every specific detail, the breakdown needed to swim fast in a 50 or 100, but you did so with a lot of different elements, and we were doing something different every day that we showed up. Whether that's a Gatorade set or something actually more serious and intentional. And like, have you always had this creative brain? Where did that come from?
You know what? I didn't realize I was that creative until I was kind of put in that position. I never considered myself to be a creative person. But when I was in that position, I'm like, wow, that's really creative, Brett. Like, how the hell did you think of that? And I think there was a couple of situations here. There was, a lot of it stemmed from David Marsh, right? He put me in a situation where he said, Brett, be creative. Like, he literally said, be creative, have fun with these guys. But he also said, get them to swim fast, right? There was an expectation of these guys need to swim fast. And so there was this pressure of like, hey, we got to prove ourselves, guys. We're going to have some fun, but we got to prove as well. We got to get results. So there was always that idea of we're doing something for the result. And it wasn't just like have fun for the sake of fun, you know? But I always thought to myself, like, how can I change it up? I remember we used to go on bike rides, you know, like I said to the guys one day, like, everybody get a bike. I don't care if it's a road bike, a mountain bike, whatever it is, just get a bike and we're going to go on a ride. And these rides became competitive, you know, it was like, we just did stuff like that where it was kind of like, it wasn't planned. You wouldn't read about it in a textbook, but it had such an effect on the group of like guys putting bike shorts on and kind of strapping into some pedals and like going out and riding with the boys, like it was something about it. And we just did stuff like that all the time, where I would just walk into practice. Sometimes I'd go in early and I'd just look at the pool and I'd be like, okay, what can I do today? What can I do today? And I would just have these creative thoughts of like, I've got to stimulate these guys a different way today. I've got to challenge them in a different way. I've got to make them feel like this is the best workout they've ever done. But that pressure came from David, right? So I got to give David a lot of credit, and the freedom came from him and then the extension of that was Richard Quick came in, right? And Richard was very similar. By that stage, we got some results. Guys were swimming fast. To Richard's credit, he was like, Brett, just keep doing what you're doing, And I was like, okay, it seems to be working. So, yeah.
Why was Auburn so good in 2009? How when that 200 freestyle record is a legendary among 20 other swims in that NCs. Why were you guys so good from a coaching perspective?
2009, I think by that stage we had tweaked some things. Like we weren't in the experimental stage anymore. Like I think 2006 for me was experimental. Like that summer, that was an experimental summer, right? Like I'd never written a workout before. By the time we get to 2009, we've got a couple of years of like really good work being laid out. Okay. The team was coming together. We'd recruited well. Brian's not going to give himself enough credit here, but he was talented, right? And that group was talented. I'm not saying Brian had the talent of Cesar Cielo. Brian's a talented swimmer, and Brian's a hard worker, man. That guy's going to come and he's going to give you work. He's going to give you effort. He's not going to make excuses. He's not going to bitch and moan. He's not going to cry. He's going to come and be as competitive as he can be to be the best he can be, and that was the mindset of that whole group, right? Like we didn't have a bunch of whiners and they wanted to be successful. They wanted to be the fastest relay in history. Like that was their intention of like, guys, have a look around here. Look what we got. Like we want to be better than everybody. And so when you have that group mentality and things just click. Now 2009, there was also some circumstances that kind of led us to winning that national championship. That was pretty interesting. I don't know if I've fully told that story about 2009 before, but we were in practice like a couple of weeks before, and we couldn't get our suits from Speedo, right? Like we were panicking. And Speedo had told us like, hey, we don't think we're going to have enough suits. We don't know if they're going to be on time. If they do turn up on time, they're going to turn up to the hotel. So, we hope you get them. And I was like, no. I'm not, me, Brian. I'm like, no, I'm not taking chances on these guys. Like these guys are the best unit in the world. Like I'm finding suits. So Fred Brusquet turns up with this like jacket suit, and he does this time trial in practice. And he goes under 19 seconds in practice. And I'm like, whatever that is, I got to get some of those. And like, Fred's like, yeah, I got a contact. So we call someone up and they're like, look, it's about, $500 a suit. I go to my athletic department. I'm like, I don't know whether I'm going to get these sponsored suits. Long story short, I'm like, they said, yeah, we'll give you $3,000. That's it. We'll give you $3,000. So I'm like, okay, let's get as many suits as we can for these guys as backup, right? Just as a backup in case the suits don't turn up. Anyway, these jacket suits turn up the day before we do stingers at NCAAs, and we decided to put them on just for fun, and we line up next to Dave Durden and Cal, and we put these suits on. First of all, like trying these things on the night before was like a joke. It was like, look at these things. These are the most ridiculous things, like guys are walking around the hotel lobby, just in these suits. And it's like, what is happening here? And they're all colored, they're all shiny, and it's like, so like the vibe was just right, like for an NCAAs, and we knew we were the only ones with them. So we line up next to Dave Durden, we start doing these stingers, and my guys are just shredding his guys, and Dave Durden whispers to his guys, and they move over to the other side of the pool because like we lined up right next to him, and in practice my guys were killing these guys. So they go over there and move, and then we knew from that moment, it was like, I said to our guys, like, we've got these secret suits that nobody has, and we're gonna So guys were like literally, Brian, I think you were in the locker room, right? Like pulling suits off guys and
The
switching
whole
them out.
time I was in the locker room at Texas A&M the entire weekend. I left. I looked like a catcher. Like I had
Yeah.
Band-Aids all over. I was bleeding everywhere. Just drying
Yeah.
off suits and giving it to the next guy because we only had 8 or 9 of them.
Yeah, we only had about 8 suits, and we hadn't even tested them, so guys didn't even know whether they were going to swim fast in them or not. But we were just like, oh, we got these magic suits, and Brian's going to be in the locker room. He's going to strip them off you, and then someone else is going to put it on. So we just had guys ripping suits off, putting them back on, racing, rip it off, put it back. So it was like this suit swap.
They trusted you guys. How come they didn't freak out? I'd freak out if something new was being put in my arsenal the day before my biggest swim in my life. What made them trust you?
Because we just said to the guys, hey, guys, we've got these secret suits. We call them the secret suits. No one else has these things. You know, when you have something no one else has, it's like you feel like you've got this secret weapon, right? And I remember going to the US Open, like everyone was so critical of us and having these suits. So then the US Nationals was a few months later, long course. And I remember standing next to the Texas guys, and the Texas guys had these suits. Now, a couple of months later, you know, they'd just been bitching about how they got beat. And I remember they were swimming this long course meet, and they were racing in these jacket suits, and every one of them came back and they were like, "This suit sucks." I don't know what the hell they were telling me why these suits are so good. These suits suck. And like the Texas guys were swimming terrible in them. So it was like a few months earlier, they're like, "Oh, they've got these, you know, that's why they beat us. They had these secret suits." And then 2 months later, they're telling us how much they suck. So it was really is a mentality, right? Like it was just that mentality of like we had something that other people didn't have. And the guys just bought into it, you know.
Was that Auburn's greatest year? And would Rowdy, Eddie, Dean Hutch all agree? When was Auburn's greatest year of men's swimming?
I don't know, Brian. What do you think? I mean, no. I think, look, honestly, if you got to give the credit to the George Bavell class, right? The guys that never lost, like they didn't lose for 4 years. Like, come on, you can't beat that class. Eric Chanteau, George Bavell. I think Kurt Cady may have been in there. So it was like this group that came in as freshmen. They raced every door meet, every SECs, every NCAAs, never lost in 4 years. I mean, that's got to be the greatest team in history, right?
Yeah, I think as in terms of class performance, I would agree. I think 2004. I don't know what the points record is now, but the 2004 team set the points record, and they won. At the time, it was 600 plus points, 604, I think. And, you know, they beat their next competitor by 300 points.
Yeah.
They had several events with 4 in the final, the 50 free, the 100 breast. It was just such a dominating performance. The last year that NCAAs was short course meters, you had Fred and George both set world records.
Right.
To me, that was the most impressive single year of Auburn men's swimming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it built, you know, like it started in 97 when I came in. We'd never won before. It was our first championship. And we had these guys from UCLA who had just transferred the year before. And so we kind of had this super team of like, I walked in the right place at the right time. We had these 2 French guys turn up the same day as me, Lionel Moreau and Roman Barnier. Like these 3 foreign guys turn up on the Auburn pool deck on the same day in January. You know, and a couple of days later, we raced Texas, and Eddie's like, who are all these foreign athletes? You know what I mean? And so it was just that was the kind of the start, the genesis of this, like this dynasty of belief, right? Like bringing people in and having them believe. And, you know, we lost in 98, and I can tell you why we lost in 98, because we were so arrogant that we got away from doing the things that made us great after our first championship. You know, I was watching NFL yesterday, and the LA team, right? Like LA won the Super Bowl last year, and I think they've lost their last 2 games, right? And they're basically saying they're stuck in this kind of like celebration of last year still, of like who they were and what they did, and we kind of got caught up in that. But from that 98, we learned so much. Like we never fell back into that again. It was like, don't get complacent, you know. Complacency is a killer. And so from then it just became a dynasty, you know.
I think our sport is complacent, and I think people like you, what you're doing to make professionalism, bringing it back to that topic, is what's going to take to grow the sport of ours and do something fresh and new and take control. So I'd like to bring it back to that now, of where you are now. And you know, you just spoke at ASCA. You just had the head of the World Swimming Association on, who's trying to change the sport there. You're trying to change the narrative and what you're doing with your podcasts and the access to the athletes with your app that you're on. That's fantastic. Talk about how swimming can be a business and can be professional beyond being a coach, which is what most people just fall into.
Yeah. I've had chances to divert, right, and get out. Like, I think initially when I started the podcast, I was like, I'll start in swimming because it's the low hanging fruit, but I want to do what everybody else is doing. I want to interview a doctor. I want to interview this and that. And, you think you want to go in all these different directions with the podcast. And what I realized over time is that, I'm sure you guys are the same. You guys do a very similar thing here, is like, hey, I can influence swimming, which is a huge deal. Like, it's not going to make me a millionaire. I'm not going to get 1 million views per podcast. But you know what? Like, I can really influence the state of a sport that I love and the future, right? And not only affect the future, but I can record the history as well. And you and I, that's what we're doing right now. We're recording some history right now. Mm-hmm. And I can look back on this podcast in 10 years and be like, oh, wow, like, how cool is that I got to talk about these things? And so that's my hope. Like I just interviewed Summer McIntosh, right? She just turned 16. She's a world champion. Mm-hmm. Like, she's 16 years old. Imagine what it's going to be like for her. She goes to Paris. She goes to LA, and then maybe she's headed towards Brisbane in 10, 12 years from now. And then she looks back on this podcast when she's 16 years old and she's talking about when she was a world champion. Like, how cool is that? So, yeah, I've had this opportunity to get out of swimming, and I keep getting pulled back in because I'm like, no, it's too important, right? Like, our sport needs a spokesperson. And not just me, I'm talking about you guys too. Like, we need people who fight for swimming, who believe in swimming, that love swimming, that are passionate about it. I can't afford to walk away from swimming and say, you know what, you're on your own, figure it out yourself. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get with these athletes too, is like, I got so frustrated with the lack of professionalism in professional swimming when I went to the ISL, and I was seeing the way that these athletes were responding to a situation like that. Like, you had certainly a small percentage of people that were understanding of what was going on. There were very few people within that organization of swimmers who were actively trying to promote the ISL above and beyond what they were getting paid to do, right? Like, you have a responsibility now. You're in, and look, and now it's gone. And I said to these athletes, like, you're not acting like a professional athlete. You're not promoting it. And, well, I should be getting paid for this and that. And, like, it's beyond that, right? Like, if you want this thing to last, and now we have these athletes who are retiring at 22, 23 years old because they don't have anything now. Mm-hmm. And my fight to them was like, guys, act professional. And not only act professional, of like, it frustrated me when some of the best athletes in the world didn't embrace it either. Of like, you're on your own. Like, I'm worried about my paycheck over here. I'm going to make $1 million over here. I'm not going to try and help you and swimming and make swimming better. Mm-hmm. I just care about me. Right? There's a very me, selfish mentality in swimming that we have to get beyond. Right? It's not about me. Sometimes I tell stories where I know I'm going to get 100,000 views, and other times I tell stories where I know I'm going to get 100 views. But those stories are equally important, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the way we have to approach this as professionals. And I want the athletes to understand that, is like, stop thinking about yourself. Go above and beyond what it means to you and what you're going to get out of it. And what can you do for the sport, That's my rant.
Yeah. Yeah. But so back to something you said earlier about when you were 20 and you had this realization when you first met your chiropractor and who ended up doing all these things for you in your careers, that there was like a switch that flipped where you understood that there were things that you needed to do to get the best out of yourself. And it was almost like a maturity thing, just like you hit another level. And I didn't know this when I was working with you as a swimmer, but like, one of my biggest regrets from my swimming career is that I didn't realize and didn't know myself well enough to be able to vouch for things that I needed as an athlete. And I think, we were doing a lot of things for, the events that we were swimming, but I think looking back there were some things that I needed more volume for,
right.
and I think that but I didn't have the self-awareness to vouch for myself and go, it's my responsibility. I am the owner of my destiny, to do that. And I think in some ways, when I hear you talk about the professional athletes today and your experience, it's like, there's some immaturity in that. And some of it just like innate to the stage of life that you're in. And, we were at the NCAAs and got to listen to and just hear firsthand perspectives from some of the athletes. And it was very clear, some that were, 18, 19, 20 years old, and they gave answers like an 18, 19, 20-year-old. And then there were some people like Bjorn Seeliger, for example, who's like, are you actually college age? Because you're talking like you're, late 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that's innate or if it's something that can be coached and or influenced to people that are, just to have a wisdom beyond your years and awareness that the actions that you're taking now, although that you're kind of in your formative years still, there's a moment here that you need to capitalize on, and you may need to, rapidly mature in order to be able to take advantage of such a thing. Is that?
Yeah.
My hope is that listening to conversations like the ones you have in your podcast, like ones that we try to have, is that you're able to think about the sport and how to approach it mentally, physically in a different way, that, kids of a certain age will hear it and then be able to apply said things earlier than I did. So
no, I'm like you. Like, I want more younger people to listen to our podcasts, right? Like, listen to what this person's saying. I told a young girl the other day, she's like, hey, can I have some advice? I'm like, yeah, the advice is go and listen to Summer McIntosh. She's your age. Listen to how she's speaking.
Right.
Listen to what she's doing. Listen to how she's taking control of her own destiny. Like, these things are important to listen to and we can learn from. And look, I had the maybe the good fortune at that point in time to have been a father, right? Like, by the time I got to the second Olympic trials, so 2000, I was a father at that stage, and so for me, it was part of my maturity was like, it's a matter of life and death here. Like, I need to be able to support my family, and so like, I can't lose, like, before it was like, it's okay if I lose, whatever. Now it's like, no, you can't lose now. Like, your family depends on you. You got to pay bills. So like, I had this maturity of being able to kind of rely on that. And I think that's what happens with college kids, right? They're in these programs, and kind of what you were saying is like, you got to toe the line in college. You've got to do certain things that probably aren't to your benefit, but they might be to the benefit of the whole team, right? But there's a point where you move out of college, and now it's like, okay, I'm an individual. I'm a professional athlete now. What's best for me, Brian, right? And that's the choice that we all have to make, and it's tough sometimes. A lot of these kids in college programs, they go through the program, they have success. Like Bjorn, right? He's part of this team. Well, in a year or so, he's going to be on the outside looking in. It's like, Bjorn, that's not your team anymore. You're on your own. And so now it's like, well, what's the best interest of me, right? And what's going to get my best performances? And that's where you start to question more, and that's where you start to have more input. And a guy like you, as opposed to saying, well, I'm just going to do what coach tells me to do in this college program. Now it's like, hey, I want to be the fastest guy in this area, and this is how I want it to accomplish it. So then you have more of a say in the way that you're doing things, and more of an ownership in your own career,
Yeah.
Brett, a little bit deeper, because you and I are about the same age. In 96 was my last meet I swam for Trinidad, and I just missed Atlanta by 0.1 or something. And I kept swimming for 2 more years, but then I graduated. I didn't have the college to support my swimming. I had to start working. I was 24 years old in 98, and I started coaching by accident, and I was coaching, and all of a sudden my swimming career just fizzled out. And had I maybe gone out to Sydney, maybe I would have hit Sydney. You, at that time, had a kid. You kept swimming until you're 31. How did you do it? How? Like physically, like money-wise, and support from family, and the mentality. How is that possible?
Well, I mean, I see where you're going. Like, I was lucky that I was in a country where swimming was revered, right? Like, we're on the front page of the newspaper. So then that's when my entrepreneurship kind of hustle came in of like, okay, I'm now the fastest swimmer in Australia, but I'm not Ian Thorpe. I got to compete with Ian Thorpe, and I got to, for eyeballs and money and sponsorship. So it's like, how do you put yourself out there? So I did things, right? Like, I have a magazine down here that,
sure,
whether you like it or not, it's history and it's reality. I did a nude photo shoot for an Olympic magazine, right?
Yeah,
and it was Olympic athletes. I think they do the same thing on ESPN. What's that?
We all post magazines. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I did one, and I knew like I was a physical specimen. Like I'm not now, but I was ripped. I was a good looking. Like I was lifting weights. I was fit as hell. I'm like, you know what? Like I gotta put myself out there. So I did things where, I wasn't gonna have the gold medals that Ian Thorpe was gonna have, but I needed people to know who I was and respect me for what I did in that sense. And so there were certain things that I would do. I would look for interviews. I would look for ways that I could put myself out into the public. And I guess that's kind of the similar thing to what I'm doing now is like you find ways to self-promote in a way to pay bills. There's ways that you can do things. And I think a lot of times, and I tell recruits this all the time, don't sit and wait for someone to come and tell you, hey, we want you to swim for us. Go and tell them, I want to swim for you. That's okay. You can do that.
Right.
Self-promote, get yourself out there. And that's what I did, and so that's how I survived.
All right. John's got to take off. So see you, John. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett.
Later.
Brett, just want to finish with a few rapid fire questions before we let you go.
Uh-oh.
What's the hardest race in swimming?
The hardest race in swimming. Well, I haven't done them all, so I don't know what the hardest one is. I know that the hardest one to win is the 50 freestyle.
Glad you didn't say 400 IM.
Yeah,
Olympic gold or world record?
Olympic gold.
Which person was the greatest influence on your swimming career?
Well, it's not fair to all the people that had an influence, but it's 100% David Marsh, without a doubt.
What's the most Australian thing about you?
I like Vegemite on toast in the morning.
Can you find it now?
Yeah, you can find it. Yeah. You can find it in my cupboard upstairs, first of all, but you can, World Market.
All right. As a flag-carrying American citizen, what's the most American thing about you?
Most American thing? That's a good question. What's the most American thing? Wow, this is a tough one. What is the most American thing?
You think you've lost your accent?
No, I haven't lost my accent at all. But
do you spell American?
Can I spell American?
No. Do you spell American like OUR and RE and all that stuff they do? Color and harbor.
Oh, right.
Do
Do I change my English? Yeah, I do. You have to.
Yeah.
Especially in the South, right?
Yeah.
You have to change the way you speak. But I guess I wore khakis. I wore khakis for like 10 years, so that's probably the most American thing.
Do you pee in the pool?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Did the Gatorade set accurately capture your coaching philosophy?
100%, yeah. It was, on a whim. That was my coaching philosophy.
Was Leon Edwards' head kick knockout the greatest knockout in UFC history?
Oh no. I've seen better than that, but I've seen a lot of UFC and I've seen some really good knockouts. But Leon Edwards was clean, but certainly wasn't the best.
I don't think I've ever seen a kick to the liver end a fight before. That was an interesting one.
Yeah.
All right. Will we see someone go 19 long course in your lifetime?
19 long course. In my lifetime, no. We will see somebody swim. We'll see numerous people swim 20 seconds again here in the future, but no one will swim under 20 in my lifetime.
20 years to go to cross the 21 field. this 21.9 to 20.9 was 20 years. So you don't think in the next 50 years?
Not unless there's some crazy drug that comes out that I don't know about. But no, it's not going to happen.
I don't know, man. The Australian head of state or former head of state now lived to be 96, so that's a pretty good run. Maybe she'll influence you. On that note, Brett, thanks for hanging out with us. It's super fun to watch and listen to all the conversations that you get to have. I feel like I still get to connect with you even when we don't chat personally. And so thank you for what you're doing now. And thank you for, all the influence that you've been on me and on us. And thank you, buddy. Love you. Appreciate you.
I love you guys. Yeah. Keep doing what you're doing. It's good stuff. Appreciate it.
Where can, there's highly doubtful anybody listens to us and doesn't listen to you, but just in case, tell us where everybody can find you.
I just say Inside with Brett Hawke on YouTube is the best place to find me. Yeah.
Right on. All right. That's it for this episode of Social Kick. And we'll see you later. Thanks.